Good evening. More roads closed tonight, more arrests, and in the last couple of hours, climate change protesters have even chained themselves to Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's home in Finsbury Park. This morning, they hit the capital's transport network, disrupting the DLR at Canary Wharf. But with Londoners' lives being affected, could patience for the protest be running out? Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Commuters are familiar with most excuses for delays. This was one of the more unusual. A pair of train surfers on the roof of a DLR carriage at Canary Wharf. A third environmentalist was stuck to the doors with a note saying, "Superglued, do not pull me." The train was going nowhere.
This is a minor disruption to our lives in comparison to the disruption across the world that's happening right now due to the ecological crisis.
Minor disruption is not how Sweb Ali sees it. He works in a kiosk at Oxford Circus, where another protest has meant fewer customers, so fewer sales.
We've already had one person who's been told that they don't have to come in this week. So, he's not going to be paid for that. And then we don't know what's going to happen next week.
Customers are now not coming here. We're down 25% some of our business in the last couple of days. And of course the emergency services need to have access to this part of London, so it's hugely disruptive.
Police have been making arrests here. Protesters, one by one, being dragged and carried to police vans. They're certainly not going willingly.
There's nothing else we can do. We're here and we're holding this site because we are desperate and we are pleading to be heard and nobody is listening to us.
The traffic backed up on Blackfriars Bridge was doing little for London's air quality. You didn't have to look far to see why it was gridlocked. Upriver, Waterloo Bridge was still blocked. Waterloo Bridge is now covered by special police powers which ordered the demonstrators to move to Marble Arch. That was on Monday evening. Today, hundreds of activists were still here. The police estimate 500,000 Londoners and tourists have been affected by the road closures. So whose side is the mayor on?
I'm on the side of the right for peaceful protest. Of course I'm on the side of one of the cornerstones of our democracy. I'm on the side of those who want to make sure the government realises we face a climate emergency. At the same time, though, it's really important you protest peacefully and you listen to the lawful instructions given to you by the police and others in authority.
But there is a point where the mayor does have to say to them, look, you've made your point, you don't ally people to your cause by causing this amount of disruption in London.
Removing the train protesters at Canary Wharf was slow going. Health and safety rules dictate protective helmets, ropes and harnesses. And tonight the activists found a new target. A small group headed for Islington and attached themselves to a fence at Jeremy Corbyn's home. The Labour leader glanced at them as he left, but didn't speak to them.
Well, Simon's at Oxford Circus for us tonight, another area targeted by Extinction Rebellion. Day 3, Simon, what are we expecting next from the protest?
Well, it's very hard to say, Lucrezio, and we certainly had a few surprises today, not just at Mr Corbyn's house. The organisers had threatened to disrupt London Underground, and Underground bosses were certainly bracing themselves for that. At one point today, British Transport Police ordered the Wi-Fi to be switched off on station platforms to try to foil the protesters. In the end, they went for the Docklands Light Railway. They described it as a small test. And here at Oxford Circus, it's rather like Waterloo Bridge. The police have imposed this rule saying that the protesters should move to Marble Arch. But as you can see, there are still many here. They haven't moved. They're here in huge numbers and they don't look like they're going anywhere soon.
Right, Simon, at a very busy Oxford Circus, thank you.
Good evening. They've been on the streets for 4 days and have vowed to disrupt London for 2 weeks in their protest over climate change. And now demonstrators have threatened action at Heathrow Airport this weekend. In response tonight, the Home Secretary says the Met should use the full force of the law to stop the protests escalating. More than 400 people have now been arrested, but with little sign of it coming to an end. Do the police have the resources to clear them away? Well, let's find out. Our correspondent Simon Harris is at Oxford Circus for us tonight. So, Simon, there's no sign of their determination wavering, is there?
Charlene, since mid-morning, police here have been arresting protesters in an obvious attempt to try to clear the area around the pink boat, which has sat berthed in the middle of Oxford Circus since Monday. But it's equally obvious that arrest holds no fear for many of the activists, which is why the minute they're released from police custody, they simply come straight back. At Oxford Circus, the climate change protest turned into a game of musical arrests. To a soundtrack of disco hits blaring out from speakers on board the pink boat, the police moved in. One by one, demonstrators were taken off to police vans, but if the aim was to reopen the road, it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. The police operation to clear protesters from around the boat appears to be making slow progress. Every time an activist is arrested and carried away, another one takes their place. The organisers believe this is a numbers game they can win hands down.
Our numbers are so exponential and the police numbers are so finite that it's actually quite impossible to remove anyone in great numbers.
Tiana Jaku was arrested yesterday, but it didn't put her off. Today, she was back on deck.
They were lovely. Just asked my name and asked me if I wanted any food or a cup of tea. Yeah, great, I had a book.
They didn't charge you?
No, they didn't charge me. I've been released pending investigation.
Does it worry you might be charged?
No, it really doesn't. You know, I might get arrested again.
Ruby Pugh is a theatre designer. It was her decision to paint the boat pink to match her hair, she says. You want to be arrested?
I wouldn't say I want to. A few people have said that to me, and I wouldn't say I want to. I'm ready to. I'm prepared to if that's what it takes.
Why?
Partly because I have the privilege. I have the privilege that with my job and with my lifestyle that I can afford to.
This video of police dancing with protesters has raised questions about whether the Met is doing enough to end the disruption. Another video shows an officer skateboarding at the roadblock on Waterloo Bridge.
Personally, I would go in a lot harder because they've got to clear these roads, there's no doubt about it. It cannot go on. These businesses are suffering.
Demonstrations at Oxford Circus are nothing new. 18 years ago, the police shut down a violent May Day protest by refusing to let the activists leave. It's known as kettling. The Police Officers Union believes whatever tactic is chosen is bound to be criticised.
If we went in hard with batons out, dealing with it in a different way, you would be the first to criticise us for using too much force.
But tonight, the Home Secretary used Twitter to signal a hardening of police tactics. He said he expected the Met to use the full force of the law. And shortly afterwards, officers moved in to begin arresting protesters on Waterloo Bridge.
So the Home Secretary's waded into this now, Simon. Does this mean we're going to see a change of tactics?
Well, Charlene, so far 460 people have been arrested, but just 8 have been charged. 1,000 officers have been assigned to police these protests, including some who've been transferred from the Violent Reduction Task Force. And tonight the Met said the whole operation is causing a huge strain.
We've had to take some fairly extraordinary measures in terms of bringing people in, away from their Easter holidays they were expecting. We're having to ask people to work 12-hour shifts across the Met now, to allow us to have enough resource available to deal with both, the policing of the demands of a capital city as well as this protest.
The latest worry for the police is the threat of action tomorrow by protesters at Heathrow Airport. Easter, of course, is the busiest weekend of the year at the airport. Heathrow's authorities say they're working with the police to come up with a plan to try to stop any attempt to cause mass disruption. Charlotte.
OK, Simon, thanks very much for that.